how can this be interesting compared to Breaking Bad, or like, you know, whatever's on whatever awesome show is on Netflix, or like whatever amazing like Rihanna's Super Bowl performance, like
right.
Just like, how does this compare to that? And it is totally different, and like kind of is like it's comparing apples and oranges, right? Like both are good in their own way.
John Search here. This is our final episode of Inside Astral on the Philly-based musician mentoring program Astral Artists. Eric Huckins plays French horn. He joined us along with his wife, Gergana Haralampieva, on the violin, and Astral laureate Jenny Lee Cohen on the piano. Eric, like many of our Astral artists, teaches music. We spoke about how music can be a universal language and how he likes to challenge both his audiences on stage and his students in the classroom.
When I speak to them about music, about thinking about that it's a universal language, and how music also, a lot of people say that it can communicate more emotion than words can. Right? That's kind of like the typical saying. And so I think that where that's found is in nuance in music. It's in inflection. It's in the grammar of music. And I think a lot of where I'm thinking about in terms of communicating when I'm playing is I'm thinking about relating it to language in terms of grammar, in terms of phrasing, in terms of what I'm playing today in terms of communication. I'm really trying to communicate and convey something that hopefully attaches to somebody's imagination, kind of takes them to another place. The Nocturne, the first piece that I'm playing, really, a nocturne is something that evokes the night or night music, right? And I think that when I listen to this piece, or I hope when somebody listens to this piece, they can just kind of relax, unwind, imagine like a summer night, something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, it kind of works you'd hope it works in the opposite direction as an audience member. Like, could you tell me about a time when you felt like you really got something that a performer or a teacher was conveying to you?
Yeah. When I was a student at Curtis Institute of Music in Philly, and I loved my time here so much in Philadelphia, I would go every week to see Philly Orchestra. And one of the pieces that just kind of like took me to another planet and does pretty much every time I hear it is Mahler Symphony No. 2.
Oh, yeah.
That's one of these pieces that for me was one of the first pieces of classical music that like you put on big headphones and you blast it and it just takes you to another world. And so when I play, I try and kind of, even when it's a smaller context, when it's something sweeter, I still try and recreate that experience in some way.
So what about a time, and now going back in your position as the presenter, when a student or someone in your audience maybe had like a real light bulb moment with maybe a difficult technique or a more obscure piece of music?
Yeah, I love actually bringing new music into teaching artist situations where, let's say, I would go in through Astral. Something that I've really loved is we've gone into different fourth grade classrooms around Philadelphia. And I have loved especially bringing something quirky, some new music that is not necessarily, it's out of the box. It's not something that kids have heard before. It makes some funky sounds. And doing that, I find, especially like with kids or somebody who kind of doesn't have any preconceived notions of what music should be, they can really connect to that. They can really be into it.
They don't have a standard repertoire to base their understanding of music on. This is their conception as presented by you of this is what music is. Yeah,
it's a great thing. And you can dive in and you can talk about dynamics with weird sounds. You can talk about articulation, and a lot of what I loved that Astral kind of taught me during my time there was speaking about music in terms of the social emotional learning element piece, which is really important in education right now. Having kids connect to how they communicate socially, how they communicate their emotions, how they relate to others. And a lot of that can be learned through just actively listening to music with or just kind of like actively listening to others.
It's a back and forth. And it's an experience that the students have, that the presenter has, and you build those experiences to be able to make stronger connections with your audiences and your students. So with the piece by Strauss, I mean, that one has got history behind it, and it's maybe to not a new audience, but maybe it's easier to present because it's already something that might sound familiar.
Yeah, and I think I fell in love with the piece actually the first time I heard it and played it, because it almost felt like, even though I heard it for the first time, it was something that I already knew. It has kind of like a simplicity to it that's kind of comforting, and it's a nice piece.
Could I hear the Strauss?
Absolutely.
Thank you. see what you mean about a nocturne being a relaxing kind of piece. That's one you can just lean back into.
Oh, yeah, totally. I imagine like hammock, summer night. I don't know if Franz Strauss had a hammock, but
Maybe.
maybe.
I don't know.
I hope so.
But Franz Strauss, he makes the music part easy. He was a great horn player. His favorite composers, very much what we'd call standard repertoire, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven. So relatively easy music to grasp, right? So what's the hard part about presenting standard repertoire?
I think that the hard part of presenting standard repertoire is how do you make it relevant? How do you make it engaging?
It's a today problem, right?
Yeah, it is. It is definitely a today problem because how can this be interesting compared to Breaking Bad or like whatever's on whatever awesome show is on Netflix or like whatever amazing like Rihanna's Super Bowl performance, like
Right.
just like how does this compare to that? And it is totally different and like kind of is like it's comparing apples and oranges, right? Like both are good in their own way, but
Yeah. Like, for example, like you put an album out of all new music. So say someone came to one of your shows, one of your recitals for that, and then you play them the Strauss. It's kind of a flip of like the usual question. You get some musicians who are steeped in classical music who wonder how you present new music. What do you say to the audience through the standard piece when they're expecting the new stuff?
I think sometimes when pairing something like this with new stuff, and actually that is a lot of my recitals, a lot of our chamber music, a lot of it ends up being maybe mostly new music with one or two standard things. And I think then it becomes refreshing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be like a palate cleanser almost, where it's like something that kind of sets for a clear mind, a clean palate before you hear something else that might be a little heavier or a little bit darker or whatever.
A little more crunchy.
Maybe, perhaps, some crunch.
Yeah, because some new music has like a crunch to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the 21st century, I think there is plenty of new music that is kind of, I will say, finally informed by the music of today, of more popular music.
Yeah, definitely. And I've been lucky to work with a number of composers who are informed by electronic music like EDM or informed by jazz or kind of just music that is outside of the classical idiom.
Yeah. And I think that Jeff Scott has done a great job of that in his work. A few of the pieces that he wrote for Imani Winds, though this one that you brought today is a brand new piece. So what am I looking forward to here?
Yeah, I'm really excited to share a short snippet that's kind of a preview for the full work. The piece is called Trail of Tears. It's written and inspired by his family who he has some family of Cherokee descent. Mm-hmm. And so it was something that was very kind of close to his heart and his family, this tragic event that happened. And so he wrote this beautiful piece that's the start of a larger project that I won't get into too many details about, but he's very excited to be starting a larger project called Trail of Tears that he's going to be working on with Oberlin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I hear the piece?
Of course.
The excerpt?
Yes.
there's anger, there's sorrow, and also it's just a cool piece of music.
Yeah, I'm really excited that this piece exists in the world. It's believe it or not, even though Jeff is a horn player himself and now a very well-known composer, he hadn't written a piece for horn and piano yet. So this is his first. So I'm really excited to bring that into the world, and I was lucky to have a number of hornists who are willing to join me in a consortium to make it happen.
Yeah, and it's a piece that's going to reach people.
I think so.
Yeah, it's hip.
It is. I think it is hip.
What makes a piece hip?
I think it's hard to say exactly, right? But I think there are certain things that could make something hip or not hip, right? Mm-hmm. I think Jeff has a really interesting harmonic language that he uses. I think the kind of chords that he puts in the piano makes it hip versus not hip. When we were rehearsing to put it together, Jenny and I were remarking that it's very kind of jazz harmony-esque. Like there's a lot of things that you wouldn't hear in normal a classical sonata, perhaps.
Or maybe that we should have been hearing, since jazz was in its infancy about 100 years ago, and there have been definitely pieces of music that have been influenced by jazz, but perhaps not as many as one might have thought based on how much of a part of American life jazz was and is.
Agreed. I think music and art, I love it when it reflects life. That's when I really resonate with it.
And that's something that you can teach your students. What's the name of your school?
So I am the director of band and instrumental music at the Greenvale School. It's a private school out in Long Island. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And one of your other projects that certainly reaches a lot of people, and in that one you get to leave the storytelling to the people on stage, your Broadway work. Yeah,
and I really am fortunate to sub in a lot of different pit orchestras, and that's a blast too. And one that I was just doing all last week was playing on Funny Girl, which is one of my favorites to play. Uh-huh. And that one is really emotionally gut-wrenching, especially the second half, I think, is really kind of a beautiful story. And the horn plays a pretty pivotal role in making that emotion happen.
Right. Do you bring your experience in the Broadway pits into your presentation of what you do at all?
I don't usually, but maybe I should.
Yeah, I mean, because I think that communicating through music, it's kind of like storytelling, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I always think that people, especially Americans, they love stories. And that's kind of what programming a recital or putting an album together might be.
Definitely. The recital that I have coming up, for example, is kind of, I look in some ways as a story of my journey in learning the horn. A lot of the pieces came at a different point of when I was learning. The Nocturne, for example, was actually the first piece I ever played on the horn. I switched from the trumpet and the baritone, and that was one of the reasons I kind of stuck with the horn. I connected with it.
Yeah. So, pivoting from Broadway, your last piece takes us into the woods.
I guess quite literally. And I was lucky to play on Into the Woods as well before it closed in January. That was also a blast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, Melanie Bonny, now she presented her music and herself in a certain way. I'm referring to her in the unusual way because she went by Mel.
That's right. Yeah, and I think I'm so glad that people are kind of rediscovering her music, or not necessarily rediscovering, but that it's being played more often and featured more often. This particular piece I love to play with Jenny and my wife Gergana. We've done it now quite a few times in different contexts, and audiences love it. This, speaking of storytelling, mm-hmm. This is definitely the piece that audiences come up to me after and tell me about what they were imagining or what they were thinking. It seems to really draw people's imaginations out.
Well, it's a great thing for us to end with. Eric, thanks very much for being here today.
My pleasure, Don. Thanks.
Mélanie Bonny's Scènes de la Forêt, Scenes from the Forest. Thanks for listening to Inside Astral. This episode we featured horn player Eric Huckins, and joining him were pianist Jenny Lee Cohen and violinist Gergana Harlampieva. Our senior producer is Alex Arif, and Paul Marchesani is our engineer. Tyler McClure is our production director with assistance from Ryan Hankins. Zev Kane is WRTI's classical program director. Shout out to Lourdes, Grace, and Elisa from Astral. Be sure to follow WRTI on all the socials, YouTube, all the things, and don't forget to tell a friend about WRTI. And if you aren't already, become a member so we can keep bringing you more great podcasts like this. I'm John Search. Thanks so much for joining us.